during my regular life there, but today, but I used to just love donuts. And so it's always really enjoyable to be able to have some here and sample them, eat them. Yeah, thank you so much to everyone for coming this morning. Another beautiful day here in Chico. First day of fall, they say. I guess that's according to the equinox and the solstice. I always just like the old style seasonal division here in Chico. For winter, you get December, January, February, and March, April, May for spring, June, July, August for summer, and for fall, just September, October, November. And I think that really fits into the Chico weather pattern better, but whatever. Thanks so much again for coming. I think we have got 2 weeks from today. We're going to skip next week. There's no program here at the museum. And then 2 weeks from today, now let's see if I can, yes, Greg White is going to present on the makeup of our Sacramento Valley landscape. And Greg White is one of the most accomplished archaeologists, anthropologists, history-oriented people here in our area. He's very good. He's got several books in the works. He's presented here at the museum, I think, twice before. He really is an excellent presenter, and so I'm really looking forward to his program 2 weeks from today. Should be very good. And he's got several books in the works. Greg's a trained archaeologist, I believe. And he did the research project out in front of the Bidwell Mansion. I believe this goes back to before the virus, really. And using ground imaging technology in order to try to find out where the earlier buildings were at the Bidwell Ranch complex. Greg did the ground imaging there out in front of the mansion in an effort to find where earlier buildings had been. And he published a little booklet on it. Can't quite remember the name of that book. But again, it's going to be republished with additions now. And so hopefully we can get Greg back in here at a future date and have him tell us about that. Just to mention, there with the latest Chico News and Review, the best of Chico, the little selection by the community every year of their favorite spots of all different categories and kinds there. And so our museum, of course, is very pleased that we're pegged as the #2 museum in Chico. And so, yeah, that was fun to see. I think we'll just go ahead and move right into our program for today. And again, it's really a pleasure to have Rod Thompson back. Rod had a great program here in the museum, again before the virus, on Chico in the 1960s. Rod's a professor at Chico State in history. His story is a good one, a Chico person who grew up here and has been able to find a path right into the history department there at Chico State as a full-time professor, and really has done a lot of great Chico research and documentation and writing. He served as Chico Heritage's head there, the board member and board chair for quite a number of years. And so we're really pleased to have him back here. And today he's going to tell us about the Ku Klux Klan in Butte County. And just this morning on the way down here, wondering what to say about that. And of course, that word, that string of words, the Ku Klux Klan, or the KKK, have been words and symbols that have floated about our culture for my entire life, and really for well over 100 years. Really here in Chico and Butte County, it never really was something that seemed to be present here in this area. It always seemed like it was, again, a part of our American story that floated far away back into different parts of the United States. And so it'll be especially interesting to hear about its presence here. We're all familiar with the racial implications and division that the Ku Klux Klan really stood for. And again, we've all been so struck, just again, in recent years with the understanding that that's not gone away. That's still right here in our laps. And so again, we look back to try to better understand how we've come through time and arrived here at this point. And I think that can be a very valuable way of again, making decisions about what to do going forward. So, I'm going to ask Rod to come right up here and tell us.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. First of all, Dave, thank you for the nice introduction and also for the promotion. I'm not a full-time professor. I am one of the many academic underlings. I'm an instructor and lucky to work any particular semester. But I love the history department at Chico State, and I really appreciate being part of that. Dave also brought up something else, that this topic is one that can be triggering, and I've spoken on numerous occasions over the last 6 or 7 years in the community, on campus, about various topics related to social justice issues in the history of Butte County. That's kind of my local history niche. And this time, for the first time ever, I got emails before by people who are obviously concerned, asking questions, just what is this going to be about? A few people actually contacted the chair of the history department, my boss, to find out just what is this old white guy on about. And I just want to first of all say I am not here to praise the Klan. I'm not here to promote it, but I'm here to follow up on a story I first learned about, or got a suggestion about, around 2015. And it was when this picture and its sister picture appeared in the News and Review. And I had never seen them before, but the News and Review interviewed my colleague, friend, and mentor, Dr. Mike Magliari, about it. And I immediately, after reading about it, went and talked to Mike. And he gave me some background for it, and I thought that's really interesting. And one of the things that interested me is that no one had ever looked into it. The pictures were taken as a for granted, and maybe because the topic is so contentious, nobody had ever followed up on it. So I pushed it to the back of my mind because I was going into grad school and I had other things to do. Last summer I was researching, I've got a project for the history of the Prohibition years in Butte County going on. And as I was researching that, I kept running into references of the Klan in Butte County and the Klan in all the neighboring counties, and news from the national level making it into local newspapers about the Ku Klux Klan. So I set aside the Prohibition Project long enough to dig into, find out as much about the local Klan, the Klan in Butte County as I could, principally in the 1920s. So again, here's this first picture. Parade float, I'll talk more about that later, what the signs meant at the time. We have a couple members of the Hooker Oak Clavern. Clavern is a name of a Klan lodge. The Klan is structured like a fraternal organization with officers and members in different ranks, different positions. The man on the right is a Kleagle. He's a recruiter for the Chico branch. So that's one picture. Here's the other picture. It's of a parade that took place in 1928. It was an Armistice Day parade to celebrate the end of World War I. And in that photo, they're marching north on Main Street. They're in the middle of a giant parade, the largest parade Chico had seen to that point in its history. There's thousands of people. There's probably 1,000 people in the parade, and the whole town's basically there. And they're crossing the intersection at 3rd Street. So this is what we had. And that's what led me on my journey. Now, to understand what happens in Butte County, I'm going to give you a short history of the Klan, because the Klan has been many different things in its existence. And people who study the history of the Klan identify there's a first Klan, there's a second Klan, that's the one that appears here, and then there's this hodgepodge, unorganized Klan that reemerges after the Second World War, and that's kind of the same phase of the Klan we're in. So the first Klan, these men, this photo only recently come to public light. 6 of those 7 men are the founders of the original Ku Klux Klan in Pulaski, Tennessee. They founded it in 1866 in the aftermath of the American Civil War. They were all Confederate veterans. They were educated, and they considered themselves the elite of society. Because several of them were. They had the means, they had the education. And one night in 1866, that part of the South is devastated. It's not doing particularly well, but boredom's a real problem for these guys. And they decide that they want to found a club. They want to found a fraternal organization so they can pal around, maybe get some more people involved and have something to do with all this spare time they have. So they get together in their first meeting and they just, well, what are we going to call ourselves? They decide on some rituals. They want to wear costumes. Why? Because costumes are super popular at the time. And so they decide, they're debating what their name should be, and they knew Greek because everybody with an education knew Latin and Greek back then. And someone threw out the word kuklos, which implies a band or a circle. But they decided they weren't even going to do that, and someone said, well, let's say Ku Klux instead, and if you add Klan on the end, I think we've got something, and it's a name that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything to the original creators. It's just a nonsense phrase. And so then they set about doing what they intended to set about to do. They make some nifty costumes out of some exotic fabric, very colorful costumes, and they set about going out at night to visit their sweethearts, to crash parties being held in Pulaski, and the first time they're actually sighted by a non-member, they're having a picnic on the side of a creek. That was the Klan as it was originally conceived. But in the chaos of Reconstruction, in the aftermath of the Civil War, political violence started ebbing in, and violence targeting the freed, the formerly enslaved African Americans, came into the community, and by 1868, the Klan had changed. These are some of the early Klan costumes. There's no central organization. What happens is people in outside communities hear that there's this group and they're having a good time, and later they're getting really involved in political and racial violence, and so copycat groups appear. There's no organization to this. The men in Pulaski had no say over what anyone else was doing. And you can see in the costumes, these are the original Klan costumes. This is not what we think of when we think of the Klan today. These are super colorful. And they've got faces painted on them. They're not necessarily conical hoods. There's sometimes fake facial hair attached. The whole notion that they rode around trying to scare black people pretending to be ghosts is just a myth. But they were very colorful because, again, costumes were popular at the time. They were taking off as something to do, a lark to have. So there's no central organization. But what happens is, in Reconstruction, in the South, there starts to be, as the South, which was Democratic at the time, in politics, started to try to reestablish the supremacy of the Democratic Party in the South. And so there starts to be political violence, one of the few periods we've had significant political violence in our nation's history. And they start to target Republicans. And this is a photo, a federal officer, investigator, came across a group of Klansmen about to execute a white man. And they were going to execute him because he was Republican. And so the officer busted them gunned down a couple of the Klansmen, and confiscated all their stuff, saved the man. And so they recreated the scene in this photo. These are the costumes and more examples of the costumes they were wearing at the time. But the violence as it began was political violence. But because the formerly enslaved were universally Republican, because it was the radical Republican Party at the time that passed the 13th Amendment to the Constitution that almost ended slavery in the United States, that the Klan, their targets start to become African Americans predominantly. And throughout its heyday from 1868 till about 1871, the most common statistic I see thrown out there is they're murdering about 2 people a day on average throughout the South. That's the body count. It's not happening everywhere. The Klan is at its most successful in rural areas with white majority populations. It doesn't really have an urban impact. In areas where there's a majority black population, it's not like African American men are sitting around waiting to get murdered. The Klan is not successful there either. But what they are successful at, as they become essentially a domestic terrorist organization, is they're effective at creating fear amongst black men to exercise their right to vote. And that was probably the most successful effort of the first Klan. It doesn't last long because this domestic terrorism is embarrassing, not just to the nation, but to elite white Southerners, the people who control the wealth and the political power, and it just makes everybody look bad. So there starts to be cultural backlash against the Klan, and then the federal government, at the behest of white Southerners, the federal government steps in, passes some legislation. In 1870, 1871, the most famous is what we call the Klan Act today, the Enforcement Act of 1871, which gave the federal government the power to go in and round up Klansmen and put them on trial. And today it actually includes the power to sue groups that violate your civil rights or civil liberties deliberately, and you can sue them. And so that has actually been a powerful tool to bankrupting hate organizations more recently in United States history. It's a bit of trivia there. But so the Klan comes, by 1872 the first Klan's gone and there's nothing left. There's nothing left for years. It disappeared, and if only it had stayed that way. But what happens is after the Civil War, there's this, the Civil War was embarrassing. It's not a war for states' rights. It's not a lost cause. It was a war over slavery, over protecting the institution of slavery, so a minority of powerful white men and their families could continue to engage in slavery to protect their wealth and the power that came with it. That story starts to get rewritten though, and the United Daughters of the Confederacy are the vanguard of that movement to rewrite the history of the Civil War. That's how we get all those statues of Confederate generals, is largely through their efforts. And then historians pick up on that message and decide to run with it. It's a much easier story on your conscience to tell than the truth. And so by the turn of the 20th century, pretty much all the textbooks, pretty much all the people are saying that, yeah, it was a lost cause, it was over states' rights, slavery wasn't nearly as bad as people thought it was. And those things have become part of the cultural memory. And it's in that context that we get the first epic film in the history of cinema, D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. It was originally called The Klansman because that was the title of the novel it was based on. And once to my chagrin, I spent a long time looking for Birth of a Nation in Butte County records, didn't find anything, and then realized they were still calling it The Klansman in Butte County. And then I found all the information I wanted on it. But as you probably know, The Birth of a Nation is a completely fictionalized retelling of the Civil War and Reconstruction. It places all the blame on, Northern carpetbaggers. The Southerners are just victims, and the African Americans become ugly, evil, rapist, murdering, uncontrollable part of the population. And who comes to save the day? It's to save white womanhood, to save society. It's the Ku Klux Klan comes back. And by this time, the lost cause story is so ingrained into the American brain that nobody questions it. And everybody thinks this is the most amazing film ever made. It shows first in 1915, and I'll come back to that. But there's a story that President Woodrow Wilson at the time, the first film to be shown in the White House was Birth of a Nation. That's true. And then there's a story that Woodrow Wilson said something to the effect that, it was like writing history with lightning. And while that's certainly the kind of thing Woodrow Wilson would say, there's actually no evidence he said it there. But Before then, Wilson had written a book about the history of the United States called History of the American People, and after the Klan's first showing, they took a quote from the President of the United States book and they put it in the beginning, like at the beginning credits essentially. And this is what he said, basically that the Ku Klux Klan were the mighty empire for good, came and saved the South. If it weren't for the Ku Klux Klan, we'd all be lost. And so whatever you think of Wilson as a president, he's a pretty lousy historian. But maybe this story sounds familiar, but the fact that the President of the United States was legitimating this in public, that added a lot of fuel to the fire. So that brings us to the second Klan. This man, Colonel William Joseph Simmons, was a failed Methodist circuit preacher. He was eventually canned because he was bankrupting all his congregations. He basically drained all their accounts. And after he failed as a Methodist preacher, he became a career fraternal organization man. So when the first Klan appears, fraternal organizations, sororal organizations, clubs, were starting to become really popular. By the 1910s, 1920s, they were all the rage. And I'll give you a sense of how popular they were later, but he realized he could make some money getting involved in fraternal organizations. So when he starts the second Ku Klux Klan in 1915, he actually belongs to 6 other organizations. He's got officer positions in 6 other fraternal organizations. That's how he makes his living. But he decides that it'd be much better if I controlled my own organization. So he looks back to this reinvented history of the Klan that's being shared, and he takes some elements from the original Klan, and he adds a whole bunch of his own. He borrows, steals ideas from other fraternal organizations, and creates a new fraternal organization in 1915. Now, I have finger quotes around Colonel because he was a colonel in exactly the same way that Colonel Sanders was. And I'll just leave it at that. So, on November 25th, 1915, Thanksgiving Day, Simmons leads about 25 men up on top of Stone Mountain, just outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and they have the inaugural ceremony of the Klan, and they burn a big old pine wood cross. This is really, as far as I know, this is the first time there's ever been a cross burning involving the Klan. That's a symbol they take on. And they do some ceremonies, some rituals, some really sort of goofy looking rituals, but someone from the Atlanta Press is there, and he dubs it to be an impressive start to this organization, and they promise to uphold the law and uphold Americanism. And there's a lot of groups at the time making those two promises. They were going to be for law and order. Prohibition's is just around the corner. There's a lot of activity towards ending, damn them, the ability for Americans to get a drink. So they make these promises that are pretty standard promises, right? And the organization, in spite of what the newspaper said, was almost a complete dud from the beginning. They never have more than a handful of members. People are coming and going regularly because there's a lot of disagreement and division in the ranks. They incorporate in November. A few months later, they reincorporate with a brand new list of founding members. There's lawsuits going on between them. Simmons isn't bringing in enough money to even afford their own place to meet. They're borrowing other lodges to have meeting places, and they're almost invisible in the Atlanta press. And they're not really spreading outside sort of the immediate area around Atlanta. So it looked like it was going to be a dud. Then 2 things happened. World War I. And that's when the United States got absolutely nativist, extreme, anti-immigrant. At that time, it really takes off in response to the war. That's not uncommon during wars. So that gets people interested in the Americanism, anti-immigration platform of the Klan. And then these 2 people get involved. Mary Tyler and Edward Clark were the co-owners and I think the full staff of the Southern Publicity Association. They didn't really have many clients, but they got Simmons on board as a client, and their biggest client. And they promised him they would market the Klan, they would take care of everything, and in exchange, they would take 80%, of which they would pay all the expenses and all the share of the profits that went to everyone else, and Simmons would get $2 for every member. And Simmons says that sounds good, because he wasn't really into leadership or work or anything like that. He just wanted the money. So that worked for him. So these guys take off, and it's in these conditions that the Klan explodes in the United States and becomes a national phenomenon. It's literally pretty much everywhere. This is what the Klan looked like. It was essentially a pyramid scheme. It wasn't a Ponzi scheme, but it was a pyramid scheme. And it was essentially there to grift the membership of as much money as possible. So it cost $10 in those dollars at the time. That'd be, you know, $125 today maybe to join. You did have dues, annual dues after that. You also had to buy your own regalia, and that cost $6.50. And the regalia cost $2 to make, so there's some pretty good profit there. Simmons gets $2 off the top, and he gets all the profit from the regalia. So he makes $6.50 on every new member. All right. Then the Southern Publicity Association took the last $8. They got $2.50, and they paid their own expenses out of it, travel, things like that. A Grand Goblin is the leader, a statewide leader of the Klan. So by this point, the Klans, there's state leadership in every state, and every state leader gets $1.50. And then a Kleagle is a recruiter. Okay, and so the Kleagle got $4. That's a huge incentive to recruit, because at the time that's a significant amount of money. To put it in perspective, while Simmons was leader, and if there were 4 million Klan members during this time, Simmons made the equivalent of $330 million in a period of 5 years. That's what this looks like, okay? That's what's going on here. And because of this system, it's not really well policed. It's full of graft. Recruiters are taking in recruits, not reporting them, keeping the money. Money's just disappearing, particularly at the state level. And it's not just Simmons and the Southern Publicity Association that's getting rich. It's really state leaders are getting really, really rich too. And that's going to make it, as that appears in the press, it's going to become obvious to everyone that the Klan's not what it says it is. It's not for law and order. So when Simmons founded this thing, he created all sorts of rituals, all sorts of literature. This is the Koran, is the manual of the Klan. You'll notice a lot of K's today in this lecture. And when you joined the Klan, you were naturalized into the Klan, which is an odd term for an anti-immigrant group, but that's what they picked. And amongst the other things you swore, after you played your KLUX token, that's your fee, you went through this ritual, and you promised to not discriminate against anyone based on their religion or their political views. But you also had to verify that you're a native-born white Protestant. Okay? Only WASPs are allowed into the Klan. And you had to swear to support white supremacy. That's where our butts all start to pucker, right? Is at that moment. Every fraternal and sororal organization in the United States at that time segregated. Everyone. There were no integrated organizations at all. So this in and of itself does not make the Klan different in the 1920s. I don't agree with it, but it doesn't make it different, just so you're aware of that. But what happens is the Klan has this and other things it says in its published ideology, but when the recruiters go out, they'll say whatever it takes to get someone to sign up. So the Klan recruiters often deny these things. And you get the most common thing you see is when someone says, well, we hear you don't like black people. We hear you're racist. And the common answer was, oh no, the Ku Klux Klan is the best friend the black man has ever had in America. They're willing to just say whatever it takes to get members. And we'll see that in the case of Butte County. This is an ideology only for fun. And it was only taken, in some communities it was taken very seriously, and in some communities it was not even a consideration. And so the experience of the Klan across the nation in the 1920s is very different from community to community. We're almost to Butte County, I swear. So what's happening, to set the context, because the Klan comes later to Butte County, and what's happening is it's taken off, is becoming popular, 4 to 6 million members across the nation, but things are starting to appear in the national press that belie this whole law and order thing. So down there in Georgia, Klan members are busy suing each other over power, over money. That's making it into the national press. And groups are starting to split off. They can't agree, so splinter factions are appearing. In California, in Sacramento, And in San Francisco, the local Klan gets involved in graft and local politics. In extortion, in trying to rig elections, things like that. That gets out in the news. That doesn't look like law and order. In Oregon, many communities in Oregon have very corrupt branches of the Klan in them that are trying to take over power through local politics and are doing so through crooked ways. The Reds, and these are just some examples. There'd be spots all over the map. In Los Angeles and the Klan is actually engaging in violence. It's actually blowing it some of the times. The Klan members themselves are getting killed, but it's not. It's in the name of trying to bust bootleggers. Violence is erupting and people are getting killed. And Ohio was bad. Indiana was really bad. In Indiana, the Klan took over the state for a couple years, controlled the legislature. The Grand Goblin of Indiana ended up very rich. And then he kidnapped, tortured, raped, and murdered a young girl. And that was in the American press. And so the Klan is starting to crumble by 1922, 1923. People are fleeing it because it's not what it says it is. So that brings us to Butte County. Birth of a Nation did come to Butte County. It came first in 1916. It came to right next door to the Majestic. Here we are, right here. Wow. And it showed to great fanfare. It had an extended run. Every show was sold out. Everyone was, this is fantastic history. This is history done really, really well. And then it comes later to Oroville, and then it comes back and forth between the communities. And it's going around the nation fairly regularly. But this was not enough to start a Klan in Butte County. Okay, this didn't do it. Many, many showings of the Klan, of the Birth of a Nation over a few years didn't do it. But then in 1922, when all the chaos is happening in the national press, in the Oroville Daily Register, these letters appear. And they appear just like that, without it. They're not part of an article. There's no explanation. There's no attribution. They're just anywhere in the paper where there's room. And that goes on for a couple weeks, and there's a lot of discussion in the public. There's obviously anxiety in the public because people are thinking, gosh, the Klan is not what it says it is. We don't really want it in our community. Is it coming to our community? And then it turns out it was a big joke by the editors at the Oroville Daily Register. They were the city council wanted to start a Keep It Clean club to clean up Oroville. And I don't know how people took that joke, because the only subsequent comment I found in the press was a young boy who won an essay competition saying it sure was nice to clean up Oroville. But it's a sign that it's on people's minds, and that continues in these early years of 1922. The following month, the marshal, Ted Peck, gets a letter. What's happening? Some of you may have heard this. The rock shower or rock throwing incidents are taking place. Rocks are falling on warehouses. No one can figure out where they are. All interesting letters pouring from around the nation. I can contact the spirits. I'll tell you what's happening with the rocks. The marshal gets this letter from the Grand Kleagle of the Chico Klan. And people are freaking out. And then the marshal says, wait a minute. And he asks around, and it turns out the Grand Kleagle was a high school student named Cecil Payne, who said he had 282 Klansmen underneath him, that he had signed up 282, which would have made him insanely wealthy for a high school student. It would have been about 5 years of money that he could possibly make. And nobody took him seriously because there's no way to take him seriously, and there's no way it's true. And this was quickly forgotten. The rock shower incident was not quickly forgotten, but Cecil Payne was. But the very next month, first of all, this is not a picture of Chico. There's not very many pictures of the Klan in Butte County that survive or that I've been able to locate. But it will help illustrate. What happens is in April of 1922, a man named T.R. Jacques and his family are driving home from Gridley back to Chico on brand new Highway 99. And they're near the junction that goes to Richvale. And Jacques says, I saw Klansmen riding through the field in full regalia. Now he was on the highway and they were off in a field, so he couldn't chase them. And he went home and he reported it, and it makes it into the Chico Enterprise. April of the following year, family's passing by the exact same place, and they saw an entire group of Klansmen in full regalia, and they were burning a cross. And this time the Chico Record, which got the other newspaper, the competing newspaper, decided they'd go look into it, and it turned out it was a flock of sheep, and the shepherd had lit a big old bonfire in the middle of fields so he could keep an eye on him. Now, I don't want to disparage T.R. Jacques, because he was the circulation manager for the Chico Enterprise. I presume he was intelligent and sharp and able. Maybe he did see something. Maybe he thought he saw something, but there's no other evidence of a Klan in Butte County this early at all. So maybe there was, but there probably wasn't. Probably he thought he saw something he didn't really see. But it continues, because the very next month, one of those incidents down in Inglewood, California, the Klan, which is big in Southern California, they raid a house that they believe that there's a illegal still run in it. The guy owning the house is a bootlegger. And so all these guys get in their robes with masks on, and they come sneaking at the house with their guns out. They're going to teach this bootlegger a lesson. And the guy in the house, guy from South America, sees them coming, and he starts shooting. And he kills one of the Klansmen, who turned out to be a police officer. And that's when the crap hit the fan for the Klan in California. That started the process of it becoming harder to be a Klansman in California. That's in the press. This is Thomas Woolwine. He's the district attorney of Los Angeles, and he raids Klan headquarters in Los Angeles. And in that headquarters, they had a list of all the Klan members in California. So Woolwine publishes the names of everyone in the Los Angeles Klan in the local newspaper. Authorities in Sacramento asked for the list. Authorities in San Francisco asked for the list. In those communities, the names of everyone's published. Our DA at the time, John Robertson, gung-ho district attorney, said, I'm not going to have the Klan in my county. I'm going to get a copy of that list, and if there's any Klan members in here, I'm going to make it hard for them. Nothing ever happens. So either Robinson didn't ask for the list, and I've been in the archives, I've requested, there's no evidence that a letter was ever sent. The district attorney's archives don't go back that far. They were essentially destroyed by time. It's also possible that he requested it and there were no names to be shared at the time, and I think that's the case. I think in 1922 there was nothing like an official Klan here. But Woolwine carries on into our next bit, because he uses his political success of fighting the Klan to run for governor in 22, and he runs against this man, Friend Richardson. And Richardson actually had the support of the Klan in California. They voted for him because they believed he'd be tough on law and order. He'd fight the prohibition fight. He'd go hard against bootleggers. So they, as a bloc, voted for Richardson. And then in exchange, immediately Richardson passed a law, signed into law, an act that made it illegal to wear a mask in public, except for health reasons. Remember that the next time the government asks you to wear a mask, right? This made it harder to be a Klansman, because you had to be willing, if you were in the Klan, and to go out in public, people are going to know who you are. You can't hide it, okay? This is probably a reason that the Klan comes later, because this puts a big brakes on recruitment in California. And that, like I said, I think that's why it took longer for there to be the appearance of the Klan here. But around Butte County, the Klan's everywhere. The Klan's everywhere. In Red Bluff, the Klan up there is trying to extort wealthy business owners. They're threatening to murder them if they don't pay off. In Marysville, the Marysville Klan is growing fast. It's having public ceremonies. It's threatening the local press. It's threatening the local government. And it burns a giant cross on the Sutter Buttes in December, so that everyone can see and know who's in charge around there. In Sacramento, part of the Klan shenanigans there, a former Chico resident gets named county assenter thanks to Klan improprieties in the election. So it's happening all around us, but it's not quite here yet. But it will be, as we'll see. And at first, the Klan first appears in 1924, the beginning of 1924 in Gridley. What happens is Birth of a Nation comes back one more time to Oroville, to the Gardella Theater, probably because of Klan organizers, and then they have a little event in Gridley. And what they have is basically a dinner seminar. They offer some music, it's free, then there's a little talk about the Klan, about what it's about, its history, things like that, and then afterward there's a free meal. And about 150 people from Gridley attended this. And there was a minister from Marysville who's associated with the Marysville Klan, and there's one Klan member from the Marysville Klan, and at the end of the meeting about 25 men from Gridley decided they wanted to have a clavern of their own in Gridley. Don't have any names, they're not mentioned, but that's when the Gridley Klan starts. That's nearly the last thing we hear about the Gridley Klan, but not quite. This is not a picture of the Gridley Klan. There's no way it was that big. But the very first time the Gridley Klan reappears as an organization in their robes happens in the summer of that same year, 1924, when six of them walk into a church service in Gridley during Sunday services. They walk in very quietly, they walk in file, they walk up to the pastor, and without saying a word, they hand him an envelope, and inside is, I think, $50 as a donation and a letter that thanks the minister and his congregation for being all for Americanism and law and order, and they file silently out. Now, none of the men were wearing masks. No one's named, but the newspaper reporter says it looked like they were all farm workers. They were all ruddy and their faces were weathered. That's the first appearance of the Gridley Klan. The second appearance is much bigger. What happens is, in 1924, in the summer, the Klan comes back and it's obviously on a recruiting bend in Butte County. And this is going to be the year when they get successful in Butte County. This man is Keith K. Allen, and he was the enforcer for the Oregon Klan. And he was a Klansman through and through. So he comes down to speak, and 1,000 residents of Gridley show up to hear him. And that is more than half the population of Gridley at the time. And he gives a speech, and really, in essence, upsets the audience because his speech is largely anti-Catholic. It's a bunch of anti-Catholic ranting. He encourages the residents of Gridley to boycott any Catholic-owned businesses in town, and this message goes down like a turd in a punch bowl for the residents of Gridley at the time. And so they were really put off, and that makes it into the press. So he speaks at Oroville a few days later, and he's completely changed his message. He's got nothing to say about anti-Catholicism. He just talks about the history of the Klan and how pro-American it is and what the Klan can do for your community. So this is part of that flexibility of the Klan messaging. To put a bullet in Keith K. Allen's story, the Oregon Klan dissolves after this almost immediately. He goes to Canada and founds the Ku Klux Klan in Canada. So they had actually made it that far north. But he won't come back into our story. So the Gridley Klan, there's one more incident that the Gridley Klan may have been at, but there's no evidence. That's really the entire history of the Gridley Klan that I've been able to reestablish. At most, at that incident with Keith K. Allen speaking, there were 12 Klan members in attendance of that event. That's all I can verify. That was the membership of the Gridley Klan, if in fact they were members of that Klan and not the Marysville Klan. This was the Invisible Empire Knights of the Ku Klux Klan was the official name of the organization, and the Gridley Klan really got the invisible part down well. There's no violence, there's no political rhetoric, at least not in public. There's no night riding, there's no cross burning, there's none of that. None of that at all. And that is actually the pattern in Butte County through this period. So that's about it for the Gridley Klan. But now we're going to head towards Chico because they're working their way, the Klan recruiters are working their way through Butte County. That guy is Dr. James Rushton Bronson. He's a doctor of law, and he was the Klan's head recruiter for California. He spoke all throughout California. And he brought sort of an erudition to the Klan's presence in the state. And he comes to Chico. He comes that summer, he comes and speaks at what we call 1 Mile today. And the city tried to stop him. The city of Chico refused to issue him a speaker's permit because they thought it was going to be politically oriented, and they really didn't want Klan trouble in Chico. So they refused, but then when they were challenged, the city council said, well, actually, you don't have the authority to do that. So they had to give him a permit. So he spoke not to an audience, to a bunch of parked cars is what he spoke to. Everybody who came refused to get out of their car. The reporter guessed that there was maybe 75 people present. Afterwards, however, though, they segued out to Parrot Ranch, southwest of Chico. Rancho Llano Seco is what we call it today. To go out there, and there was another talk later that evening. No idea what it was about, if there was any recruiting. There may have been a Klan in Chico by this time, but I can't confirm it. Yeah, so he came to Bidwell Park, and that was it. He came and went. But he did come back again soon. And he came back again early the following year. And this time, he had a really hard time finding any place to speak. I believe the city was able to legislate its authority to not issue the permit between these two. And he ended up, nobody wanted him to speak until he found the new rotunda, is what it was called at the time, let him speak there. It was about where Sierra Central Credit Union is now. And there were 150 there's one report says 150 people, the other says 350. Either one's a marked increase in attendance over the previous gathering. And there were Catholics in attendance, and there were local black people in attendance, and nobody was pissed off at the end. So he just talked about the history of the Klan again and didn't get into any sort of political agenda. The day before, Klanspeople from all around the county surrounding Butte County came to Chico, wore their regalia, walked through downtown, and handed out flyers advertising this event. And in response, that's Thomas Fleming, Chico State's second black enrollee, very famous journalist. It's only because of him we have any idea what it was like to be black in Chico in the early 20th century. But they knew the Klan was in town, so him and his stepdad got out on their front porch with every gun in the house, waiting for them to pass by, but nothing happened in the end. So we have this anxiety still in the community, we have resistance to it, but the Klan's kind of thinking, well, we want recruits, let's not stir the pot. So what's happening is there's all this pushback in the press against the Klan coming into Butte County, and every city in Butte County, with maybe the exception of Gridley, was verbally against having a Klan presence in their community, because everything in the national media, the only news anybody's getting is, oh, there's Klan violence here, there's Klan political corruption here, and it's just causing chaos. We don't want that in our community. It's not any altruism, it's not any disbelief in white supremacy, it's that they don't want the community destabilized by the Klan presence. So in the aftermath of subsequent talks, these are comments made in the local press about the Klan's speeches. This is tolerant and free from abuse. This is a mild as milk speech. And in fact, the last time there's a talk in Gridley is at Woodrow Wilson School there. The city denied them access to speak there, but then the superintendent of public instruction said, they didn't have the authority to do it, and he let the Klan speak there precisely one time, and he said that was basically going to be it. So we have this resistance, though, building up in the community. We're going to end up with Klan. We have a Klan in Gridley. How long it lasts, I can't tell you, because this is the last time anything mentioning Gridley in the Klan appears. But it does appear in Chico. And by the middle of the 1920s, the Klan is definitely here. And it appears in what I like to call the Burt Courts affair. Now, Burt Courts was a West Point graduate. He was a lieutenant in the 92nd Infantry Division, which was the colored infantry division. It was the first time blacks served in that capacity in the United States Army, and so he was a white officer in this black infantry division. They served in World War I. He served with great distinction. He received multiple citations, including from the King of Belgium for his service. And then after World War I, he retired, and he moved to Modesto, and he opened a men's haberdashery. And then on a visit to Chico, he fell in love with that woman. Her name was Juanita Scott, was her maiden name, and her father was a local and successful feed store owner. She was sort of a belle in upper Chico society. She was a talented musician and something of a socialite, and so was Burt. And so they got married, and they lived between Chico and Modesto. And he ended up with stores in both areas. Burt Courts was a fraternal organization man through and through. He belonged to many. He held officers' positions in many of them. And when the Klan first appears in Modesto, he is their representative. He speaks on their behalf at the Modesto City Council to try to get permission to have a Klan meeting at a city park in Modesto. In 1925, Bert Kortz gets tied up in one of the inter-Klan fights that takes place. And what happens, it takes place over some meetings, some Klan meetings that had taken place in Chico. And one Klan member was suing other Klan members as a result of those meetings because that one member was a member of these invisible Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, the Klan that originated in Georgia with Simmons. But factions had split off, and now the Klan in Nevada was its own group. It was its own faction, and there was a recruiter from Nevada in Chico going to Klan meetings in Chico, and there had been several powerful figures in the California Klan at this meeting, and lawsuits had spread over slander and things like that. In that process, Kortz says publicly, "I have never sworn allegiance to the Klan." Is that true? Is it not true? I don't know. By this time it's kind of embarrassing for a lot of people to belong to the Klan. Maybe he thought it would hurt his business, but he makes that statement for what it's worth. But what we learn from this short story is that there's really powerful people in the California Klan coming to Chico, to meetings in Chico. So something's going on here. And at least several had been held before this incident. So probably by sometime in 1924, late 1924. And they involved the question of recruitment. And we only know that because conflict happened between different factions of the Klan over recruits, in other words, money, that this came to light. So I'm guessing there was a Klan probably by late 1924, but certainly no later than early 1925 in Chico, a Clavern in Chico. But this is really late in the history of the Second Klan to get established. So one of the answers I would like to know is why was it so hard for the Klan to really establish itself, even to the tiny degree it did in this county, when by 1922 it was solid in Sacramento, San Francisco, throughout Southern California, where it was huge. What was different up here? What was happening up here? Well, it is later, and so the Klan looks really bad in the national press, and membership is declining nationwide as a result. Again, leaders, community leaders in the press appear to be dead set against the Klan. There's almost nothing said favorable about the Klan ever in any of the local papers. And the anti-Catholic messaging that the Klan tried to introduce seemed to be a non-starter here. Gridley, Oroville, and Chico had Catholic communities that were important parts of their communities. The Catholic Ladies Relief organizations in each community were involved in community charity, not just for Catholics, but for the entire community. The Catholic school boys basketball team played basketball with all the Protestant school basketball teams. There's a Boy Scout troop. It just goes on and on and on, that there's all this involvement by Catholics in the community, and it seems like the Butte County community was not buying into this anti-Catholic message. Even in 1928, in the presidential campaign in 1928, when Al Smith, first Catholic to run for president, runs, Protestant preachers in Chico are defending him, saying you should not make his religion an issue. Just decide if he's good to be president or not. Don't make his religion an issue. So it seems like that message, the anti-Catholic message, wasn't taken off here. It's also, if you've read anything by Dr. Shover, if you've done much history at all, if you know about some of the events of the late 70s and into the 1980s around here, we have had problems with racial violence in this community. But the 1920s, it was really, racial tensions were at a low ebb in this community because, for two things. The white population had continued to grow, essentially exponentially, while the African American population had remained unchanged, and the Chinese population had shrank to about 10% of what it had been. So the Chinese had become an invisible minority in the community, and those that remained, they were usually second generation, they were children, but they were accepted because the Chinese were no longer perceived as a threat during economic downturns. And the African American community had never been big enough to be perceived as a threat. They were facing discrimination in access to opportunities, employment, and housing, but there was no violence, and there really wasn't much in the way of outward racism in the community at the time. At that time, it just wasn't a thing. But there were, at a minimum, 2 Claverns in Butte County. There was one in Gridley for sure, there's one in Chico for sure. I found no evidence of one in Oroville. at all. Which is weird because fraternal organizations were gangbusters in Oroville just like they were in Chico. But those are the only two I have for sure evidence of, are Chico and Gridley. So how did we get one if there was so much resistance? Well, first and foremost, there's a lot of money to be made by setting up new claverns and recruiting new members. That's the bottom line. The more you have, the more money you bring in, the wealthier the people up the food chain get. Otherwise, I'm not sure. I mean, in any community, there are people who feel differently about different things. You know, unfortunately, racism, white supremacy are still alive and well, as David mentioned. So that's part of it. But this is a time, this is the height of popularity of fraternal organizations and sororal organizations. Chico had more than 50 in 1920, and again when it's measured in 1930. That's one for every 95 male residents. To put it in perspective, we have less than one for every 13,000 male residents. People tended to belong to several of these organizations. Why? They're fun. They provide community, they provide a sense of camaraderie. And in that context, the Klan is just another one of those groups. If you can, and you're free to ignore the ideology, it can just be another group. Maybe you like the costumes, or maybe you are a white supremacist, but this is probably why a Klan ultimately appeared in the community, is some combination of these factors. There's not many more sightings of the Klan in Butte County after that. This is basically everything from 1926 and 1927. A minister who had been associated with Klan activity in the community before HM Law of the Broadway Methodist Church South, that's the southern faction in the sense of Civil War of the Methodist Church, and he held this sermon called True Fraternity for the Chico Klan. What it was about, I don't know. I've been unable to find his notes or any commentary on what the sermon was about, but he invited the Chico Klan in to talk about it. The one in the bottom right's interesting. One man was driving south of Chico and he spotted a bunch of Klansmen out at night. So he pulled over and watched. And it actually turned out to be Klanswomen. So somewhere in Butte County there was a women's auxiliary, probably in Chico, that was a thing at the time. And they were bringing clothes to give to a family who had experienced a fire and their children had lost all their clothing. So these Klansmen, women came and brought clothing and a sympathy card for the people to help them get back on their feet. That's common Klan behavior in the 1920s. And particularly for the women's auxiliary, is to do community support stuff like this. Up at the top though, the Gridley event with the Keith K. Allen speech was the biggest gathering involving the Klan in Butte County history. This event that takes place in Oroville at the Baptist Church is the biggest gathering of Klan members, with approximately 200 people in regalia without masks show up at the Baptist Church for Sunday services. They walk in, they sit through the whole service, they don't say anything, they don't present a donation, they don't present a letter, and then they go. And that was it. So the only thing I can take away from this is there were at least 200 Klan members in 1927 in Butte County. I mean, that's really all we can take away from it. But that there was that many still at that time is a little bit surprising, because the Klan's definitely on the outs nationwide. And that brings us back here, kind of full circle. Now, like I said, this picture is from the 1928 Armistice Day Parade. It is fortunately blurry. It's unfortunate because we can't see faces, can't make out what's on the signs, which is also unfortunate. There's a schoolhouse float similar to the other photo. But what I was able to do was, by looking at the businesses in the background, that's how I was able to identify this as being in the 1928 parade. There's a fortunate change of businesses between two city directories, and that enabled me to date this photo. The second photo on the bottom that we've known about forever, I can't date that with any confidence. I've actually got a retraction coming in the Chico Heritage newsletter to correct that. That one is probably 1927, but I can't be sure. The streets are paved, there's lines on them. That's a little bit of evidence, but can't do much. But what it does show, I'll come back to that one, but what that does show is the Klan in the middle of the 1920s tried to become more mainstream by changing its message, and so they became pro-public education. And they wanted to increase access to publication, build more schools, get better textbooks, get better teachers, and pay teachers more. That really made my eyes open up. But they wanted to do it in opposition to parochial schools. They wanted to basically shut down Catholic education in the United States, and they wanted the message in public education to be their message, to be this Americanism message, anti-immigration, white supremacist message. So it's not nearly as benevolent as it sounds, although they pay teachers more. The one at the top, that photo has not been seen before, and Randy Taylor, God bless him, shared it with me. They're all taken by the same man. Boone was his last name. Most famous for his ability to clean up all the leftovers at the dinner table. But he took these photos of the Klan, and I can't date that picture with certainty either, but this one has a sign that says, "Put Americans on guard," and that's a phrase attributed to George Washington during the Valley Forge period of the American Revolution. And he did say those words, but the Klan took it totally out of context. They're using it to say, let's stop immigration. That's the Klan method. George Washington didn't want immigration, so let's stop it. That's not what it's about, in George Washington's words, but at least they cited him, so we have to give him credit for that. These are the only images of the Klan in Butte County, these three. If you know of any, please, please, please share them with me. But these are the only images that survive. There's none in the press. These never appeared in the press until recently. So these are the only images we have of them. And then after the night, there's a 1929 Armistice Day parade in which did not participate. And it's never heard from again. And probably what happened, the Great Depression ended up closing that and all the shenanigans in the national press. The Second Klan goes underground after the Great Depression starts and becomes just a tiny, tiny speck of what it had been before. And I'm certain that it killed the Klan in Butte County, whatever happened to be left of it. And so the Second Klan persists. It becomes increasingly racist and increasingly violent through the Great Depression and up to the eve of World War II. It actually allies with the American Bund, the pro-Nazi party in the United States, which is a huge PR disaster for the Klan. And then the US government steps in and sues the Klan for back taxes to the tune of $685,000, and that bankrupts and kills the Second Klan forever. That's also the last time the Klan was organized on a national level. The Klan reappears after World War II. And it reappears because black servicemen are coming back and they're not willing to put up with the BS anymore. And they're starting to resist Jim Crow and white supremacy. And so the Klan reappears in backlash against that, and it becomes more of a Southern thing again. But you do see it in some other communities. And we have what may have been a final out in the open Klan appearance in Butte County in 1949, 1950. What happened is after the war, I've told this story other times, I'm not going to repeat it now, but there was a bumper crop of almonds. The braceros had all moved on to other jobs, and so there's all this money sitting on the trees of orchards and nobody to harvest it. The solution, there's all these all of a sudden unemployed because the war ended black men in Richmond. Let's bring them in to help with the harvest. Butte County freaked out, hearing that there was going to be maybe 100 black men brought in as temporary workers. And throughout Butte County, white trade only signs appeared in business windows. It had not existed before, and all of a sudden Chico segregated, just literally overnight. African Americans couldn't find housing, couldn't find jobs, including the ones who had lived here their whole lives. It's a short period of insanity. It only lasts a few weeks, but it left a legacy. The signs went down, but the feelings didn't leave. And so in Oroville, which has always had a larger African American population than Chico, they get together, ask for help, and they found the Butte County branch of the NAACP in 1946, end of 1946. And they organize, and they get active, and they do community building, and they're coming along okay. It's hard because you got to pay dues to be in the NAACP. You got to pay like $2 a year, and if you're dirt poor at the time, $2 a year is really asking a lot. And then this incident happens in this context in 1949, and it happened in, we call it the South Side neighborhood, El Medio it used to be called. It's where most of Oroville's black residents live. And what happened is the African American residents of that neighborhood wanted a church. They reached out to a black minister in Oroville, and he came, and in the process of getting a permanent church started, he set up a tent church on Elgin Street. He had permission from the city and the sheriff, and they were conducting Sunday services. Well, across the street, William and Elise Clifton lived. They were brother and sister, and Elise Clifton did not like the noise the church was making, and so she, they had an elderly father who was in the process of dying. Apparently the noise was disturbing him. So she went over and threatened the church, and then she came back and got a gun and came over and threatened the church, and she stormed off. And she set, they had an insane number of dogs. She set the dogs on the church, that didn't work. And then she just started shooting at the church, at the tent church. Nobody was hurt, thankfully. She runs back into the house, and a little while later, a KKK sign appears on the second floor in the window. You can't make it out in this crappy photograph, but that's what they're trying to show in the window up there. Now that's a real threat, right, in the context, because now the KKK is anti-African American, white supremacist, and violent. That's what's going on nationwide. The police come along, and they're going to investigate. And they don't find anything, which is no surprise, because William Clifton was chief of the El Medio Fire Department and a deputy sheriff himself. And so, surprised, they find nothing. He tells, but meanwhile, William and Elise are making threats in the press that, oh, the Klan's not going to put up with this around here. You just wait and see. The Klan's not going to tolerate this kind of behavior around here. The community of Oroville rises up against that. Both black and many white members of the community rise up. They coordinate, they create an organization to stamp the Klan out of Oroville. Very quickly, William and Elise back down, and they say, oh, I didn't say anything about the Klan. And some kids put that sign up in the window. I don't know who did it. And they quickly back down for a few months. And then Elise gets into another shooting jag. And this time, too much noise is coming out of a neighbor's house, a black woman named Deborah, I can't remember her last name, but she's shooting a shotgun, Lisa's shooting a shotgun into the air, so the pellets are raining down on this lady's roof, and this lady just storms out, confronts her, gets an apology, and then Elise is arrested finally, for what's been domestic terrorism all along, but she's finally arrested. She pays $200 bail, nothing else happens to her after that. I'm sure that's because of who her brother was, but this is the last sign of there being or the last visible sign of this. There probably was no real Klan involved in this. This is probably just idle threats made to terrorize neighbors to get them to do what you want them to do, because there's no other evidence. There have been, however, through my life, there have been persistent rumors of a Klan in Butte County, and because they're rumors, I'm not going to share them. They're still rumors, actually. We know we've had problems with white supremacist violence. We have the pointless Jimmy Lee Campbell murder. If you remember Perry Red Warthen in Oroville, and he was more of a neo-Nazi. We've had those incidents, and while there's still no evidence that's visible of there being anything like a Klan in Butte County, white supremacy is alive and well in some people. This was from last April in a neighborhood I used to live in just south of the park. And one of my friends had this thrown into his yard sometime in the hours of the night. And it's horribly anti-immigrant, and it's even worse in being anti-Semitic. I didn't show you the inside because it's just repulsive. There's no calls to violence. It's just anti. It's these people's fault, it's these people's fault, it's these people's fault. It's not signed, it's not attached to any organization or any individual. It was thrown out in the middle of the night in a little baggie filled with rocks, so they didn't have to stop. They could just huck it. The message is not really a Klan message. We have Proud Boys in this community. We have a Proud Boys group in this community. But this is a Klan tactic. I don't think it's a Klan. It could be a Proud Boys action. It could be a crazy individual. We don't know. But these things are still around us. But that's all I have to say for today. Thank you for bearing with me and for being here today. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have if I can.
I wasn't surprised to hear that Butte County didn't like, one reason they didn't like the Klan was because there was Catholics are such a part of the community. Yeah. It surprises me that it did so well in Southern California. I grew up in San Luis Obispo, and I have a friend who's Catholic that says that they had a cross burned on her family home in the 1920s.
Yeah.
In San Luis Obispo, like 3 blocks from the mission, and I don't understand how that would have happened because like half the town was Catholic then or more.
That's the time when Southern California there's a huge influx of Protestants moving into that part of the nation. And it coincides with that event. Maybe they're not in the majority, but they're uniting together to push that message. Yeah, it is. Yeah, no, there's nothing about the Klan makes sense, except the money-making part, right? Then it kind of puts it all together. Did someone else? Yeah.
Are you aware of any Ku Klux Klan groups actively operating in the U.S. today?
Yeah, but they're all split out. They don't agree on everything. It's just somebody decides, I'm going to start a Klan group, and he gets some buddies together, and maybe they do something, and usually they don't. They usually just get together and drink beer and eat pizza and talk hate and occasionally distribute some flyers. But there are groups that are more active. If you're ever interested in this and how it exists concurrently, Southern Poverty Law Center tracks all this. It's one of the greatest things it does for free for the nation, is to track hate groups in the nation. And they do a real good job of it. So that's a good place to. I looked this morning just to verify that there's nothing that they've seen in our community except the Proud Boys. Yeah.
Did you see any connections between Prohibition and the KKK, like maybe not necessarily in Butte County, but in surrounding counties?
Yeah, the Marysville Klan was insisting that Marysville law enforcement round up all the bootleggers. There's a lot of that in Southern California, but no, like I said, the Klan of Butte County never makes a public statement, except for the signs on their float. That's it. All right, well, oh wait, I got one more way in the back.
You mentioned that the viewing of Birth of a Nation in Chico, you couldn't find the records at first until you looked under Klansmen.
The Klansmen, yeah.
Was it advertised and shown here as the Klansmen or the Birth of a Nation?
At first it was the Klansman, and then occasionally the Klansman, also known as Birth of a Nation, because it was released as the Klansman originally, and then the name got changed very early in its release cycle. So at the beginning everybody called it the Klansman, but he changed it very soon under the recommendation of someone who had seen it, someone important who had seen it. In Butte County it continued, by the 1920s it's being called both. But around here it was, you know, if you talked about the Klansman, that's what everybody was thinking was that film.
So by that point, after the Klans Act in the 70s, I guess it was long enough that public opinion had changed about the Ku Klux Klan?
Yeah, because of that rewriting of history that starts with United Daughters of the Confederacy, and then historians in the United States just run with it. Liz, did you have?
You mentioned a photographer.
Yeah, Boone. His last name was Boone. I'm dropping his first name right now, but
Boone.
yeah, he did everything in stereoscopic images are designed to be looked through that little funny face mask, and you drop the picture in, so everything's a dual picture. All right, well, thank you. I appreciate you being here today.